You checked your bank balance this morning, not because you forgot what was in there, because you were hoping it changed overnight. It didn't. And the worst part isn't the number. The worst part is you did everything they told you to. You went to school. You got the job. You didn't blow money on stupid things. You were responsible. So why does it feel like you're running on a treadmill that someone else controls the speed of? Something is wrong. You felt it for a while. You just haven't let yourself say it out loud yet. You were maybe 9 or 10 years old. You asked for something at the store. Nothing expensive. A small thing. And the adult with you said, "We can't afford that right now. Now we don't want to spend money on that. Not save up for it yourself. Can't afford it." You nodded. You put it back. And you learned something that day. Something that no one meant to teach you, but something that sank into you anyway. Money is something that runs out. Something other people seem to have. Something you have to be careful around. You didn't know that was a belief being installed. You thought it was just a Tuesday afternoon at a store. You walked out empty-handed, and you never questioned why it felt normal. That feeling, that low hum of financial anxiety dressed up as responsibility, you carried it with you into high school, into college, into your first job. You called it being realistic. It had another name, but you wouldn't learn that name for years. The ceiling you can't see is still a ceiling. Studied hard, got decent grades, applied to a good school, or at least the one you could afford, which felt like the same thing at the time. You graduated. You had a moment, a few seconds, where you thought this is it. This is where it changes. Then you got your first paycheck. You stared at the number. Then you stared at the number after taxes. Then you did the math on your rent, your student loan payment, your groceries, your phone bill. And the math didn't work. But you made it work. You cut. You stretched. You told yourself this is temporary. This is just the beginning. And maybe it was. But 2 years later, you're still doing the same math. Still cutting. Still stretching. You got the promotion they said would change things. It helped. But somehow, and you can't quite explain this, it didn't change everything. You just had slightly more expensive problems. You told yourself you must be doing something wrong. You downloaded a budgeting app. You tracked your spending for a month. You weren't doing anything wrong. That was the part that bothered you. You were doing everything right. And the number barely moved. Something was off. You couldn't name it yet. You closed the app and went to bed. Following the rules perfectly in a game designed for you to lose is not discipline. It's obedience. You were at a work event. Or a dinner. Or maybe just a conversation that ran longer than expected. And someone started talking about money. Not complaining about it. Not stressed about it. Casually, like it was a topic with options. Like it had levers you could pull. They mentioned a property, or a return on something, or a number that didn't come from a salary. And you nodded along. But inside something shifted. Because the way they talked about it, it wasn't the way you'd been taught to think about money. They weren't talking about saving money. They were talking about money doing things. You'd always thought of money as something you earned, protected, and slowly drained. They thought of money as something that moved. You went home that night and sat with that for a while. You didn't do anything about it. But you couldn't stop thinking about the gap. Not the gap in your bank account. The gap in your understanding. Because here's the thing, and this is the part no one says clearly. You were taught how to manage money. Nobody taught you how to build with it. There's a difference. A wide one. And you'd spent the last several years becoming very skilled at something that was never going to get you where you wanted to go. You weren't behind because you were lazy. You were behind because you were running in the wrong direction and nobody told you the finish line had moved. There's the version of you that people see. Composed. Responsible. Handles things. Shows up. Pays bills on time. Doesn't complain. And then there's the version of you at 1 a.m. lying in the dark. Doing math in your head that you've already done 15 times. Running the numbers on what you need to finally feel safe. Not rich. Not comfortable. Just safe. Just a version of safe where one unexpected expense doesn't spiral into a week of anxiety. You live in both of those versions. During the day, you project the first one. During the night, you live with the second. And the worst part isn't the exhaustion of maintaining both. The worst part is the moment you realize that most of the people around you are doing the exact same thing. Your coworker, who always seems okay, same math, different apartment. Your friend who posts pictures of trips, you don't know what's on their credit card statement. Everyone performing solvency. No one talking about the performance. You noticed it. You didn't say anything. They didn't either. And here, quietly, uncomfortably, you realize something about yourself. You are not the person you thought you were. You thought you were someone who understood money, who was being smart about it. What you actually were, what you'd been, was someone who was very disciplined at staying exactly where you were. Discipline without direction is just a well-maintained trap. The performance of stability costs more than instability itself. This is the part you don't want to look at directly. Because it's easier to blame the economy, the system, the company that didn't pay you enough, the circumstance you were born into. And some of that is real. Some of that is true. But there's a smaller, quieter truth sitting underneath all of it. You had moments where you could have learned something different, and you chose comfort instead. You had moments where someone tried to show you a different path, and you called it risky. You had moments where you felt the pull to try something, and you waited for a better time that never came. Not because you were lazy, because you were afraid. And fear, when it's dressed up in the language of responsibility, is almost impossible to see for what it is. You called it being careful. You called it waiting until you're ready. You called it not being reckless. And none of those things are wrong exactly, but you used them to protect yourself from the discomfort of change. And change was the only thing that was ever going to move the number. 3 a.m. again. You're not doing the math this time. You're just lying there, looking at the ceiling. And you feel it, the full weight of it. Not anger, not regret. Something heavier. Clarity. The clarity that no one did this to you. And also that you were never given a fair chance to do it differently. Both things are true. And holding both of them at the same time is the most uncomfortable thing you've ever done. You're not a victim of your circumstances. You are also not separate from them. That tension is where the work actually lives. It didn't look dramatic. No moment of inspiration. No perfect plan that appeared fully formed. It was quieter than that. You stopped reading the news about the economy and started reading about how wealth is actually built. Not motivational content. Not success stories designed to make you feel behind. Real mechanics. The boring kind. You learned the difference between an asset and an expense. You learned why the advice, spend less than you earn, is technically correct and practically useless if everything you earn goes to survival costs. You learned that time in the market has historically beaten almost every other variable, and that you'd lost almost a decade of it trying to get stable first. None of this felt good to learn. It felt like standing in a room you should have entered years ago. But you were in the room now. You made one move, not a big one. Maybe you opened the account you've been putting off. Maybe you had the conversation with the one person who actually knew something you didn't. Maybe you just stopped pretending that the current path was going to eventually lead somewhere different. One move, and the money didn't change yet. But something else did. You stopped waiting for permission. Most people spend years preparing to start. The start was always available. The preparation was the avoidance. Something strange happens when you start to move differently. The people closest to you notice, and they don't like it. Not because they want you to fail, because your change is a mirror. When you stop complaining about money and start doing something about it, the people who are still only complaining feel something they can't name. So they say things. You've gotten obsessed. Don't get greedy. You used to be more relaxed. And some of it's care. Real care. People who love you don't always know how to show it when you're becoming someone they don't fully recognize yet. But some of it is something else. Some of it is the deep, invisible pressure of social sameness, the unspoken agreement that nobody gets too far ahead, because if one person changes, everyone has to confront why they haven't. You sit at the dinner table. The conversation is the same it's always been. The complaints, the economy, the prices, the impossibility of it. And you used to participate fully. Now you're quieter. Not because you think you're better, because you know something they haven't arrived at yet. And you can't explain it in a way that won't sound like judgment. The conversation is the same it's always been. The complaints, the economy, the prices, the impossibility of it. And you used to participate fully. Now you're quieter. Not because you think you're better, because you know something they haven't arrived at yet. And you can't explain it in a way that won't sound like judgment. Growth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just sitting at a table where you used to fit perfectly and quietly noticing that you've changed shape. It's a regular morning. You're not rich. You're not there yet. Maybe not for years. But you check the account and something is different. The number isn't dramatically higher, but it's directional. It's going somewhere. Slowly. Consistently. And for the first time in a long time, the anxiety isn't the first thing that hits you when you open the app. Because you're not looking at the number to feel safe. You're looking at it as information. Data. Something to work with. You remember that morning, years ago now, when you checked it and just hoped it had changed overnight. Hoping the number would be different without doing anything different. That was the whole story, wasn't it? Not the broken system. Not the bad luck. Not the timing. The belief that things would change while you were waiting for them to change. You didn't do everything wrong. That's the thing. You did exactly what they taught you. And what they taught you, the budgeting, the saving, the caution, the patience, all of it was real advice. It just wasn't complete advice. It was the floor, not the ceiling. And you spent a decade treating the floor like the whole house. Nobody told you about the upper levels. Now you know they exist. Now you're climbing. Not fast, not loudly, but for the first time, in actual direction. You thought doing everything right would be enough. It was never meant to be. It was always just the start. You checked your bank balance this morning. The same thing you've done hundreds of times. But this time you weren't hoping. You were watching. There's a difference. A wide one. And you know now, you've always known, somewhere underneath all the noise, that the problem was never the number. It was the relationship you had with it. The fear dressed as caution. The waiting dressed as preparation. The obedience dressed as wisdom. You thought this was just the way money worked. It never was. It was the way they taught you money worked. And the moment you understood that, really understood it, is the moment the ceiling became a floor. If this felt like your life, it was supposed to. Noir Capital. Subscribe. More is coming.